Okay, so let's start. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon to San Servolo. So for those who are online, we are on an island in Venice, hosted by the VIU University, so Venice International University. We have here a series of lectures. So we have a VIU lecture today in the framework of the globalization program. It's a teaching program with students from many countries in the world. This meeting brings together the VIU and other Venetian cultural institutions, Ca' Foscari University, the Niche Center for Environmental Humanities, and the UNESCO Chair on Water Heritage and Sustainable Development. We have a series that is called Waterscapes. We have regular meetings to talk about environment, politics, epistemology, and water everywhere. So we look at the window here and we see the water that those online cannot benefit from right now. We have a guest today, Alexis Cukier. I'm really happy that you accepted the invitation. You made this long trip, not only to get to Venice, but from the airport to here. So let me introduce you, your research to everybody so that we can then listen to his talk. So Alexis Cukier, he is a professor in philosophy at the University of Poitiers in France. He is member of the research laboratory Métaphysiquement et Philosophie Pratique of Poitiers. He's a member of the Institut Universitaire de France and editorial coordinator of the publishing houses La Dispute and les Éditions Sociales. He works on philosophy and political ecology, labor and ecological movements. That's the topic that we will be in conversation with him today. So he looks at labor, ecology, and democracy and how they intersect with each other. Among his many publications, I'd like to mention Le Travail démocratique, which has been translated into English as Democratic Work, Radical Democracy and the Future of Labor. Another publication of his is Qu'est-ce que le travail? What is work? What is labor? In 2018. And very recently, he edited this booklet, Le Marxisme écologique. I think it's a very timely and interesting choice of text on ecological Marxism. It's always useful to have text translated and brought together with an introduction for classes for students. We need that also in Italian and sometimes also in other languages. Now we have fantastic texts in French, in Italian that are not circulating in English. So we'll probably take your example on this. So your talk today is entitled Ecological Meaning of Work and the Political Ecology of Living Labor. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here and join me to welcome Alexis.
Thank you very much, Pietro, and to the organizers of the VIU lectures. Hello to everyone, and thank you for your presence. So I'm very happy to present some arguments of a book I am currently writing, which is called Political Ecology of Living Labor. So I took this again in the title. So the aim of this book, I will focus on some examples of socio-ecological struggles, but I will first, in the introduction, present you the broader project of the book and my research, is to reflect on the ways to mitigate ongoing ecological catastrophes by basing on what I call with others the political ecology of workers or political ecology of living labor. So a word about my method. It's social philosophy. Yes. Is it okay like that? Thank you. Social philosophy, which bases on workers' inquiries and investigations, empirical investigations. I also take part too. And the idea is to show that inside, in the experience of work, in the experience of these struggles, there is a specific standpoint on work and on ecology that is forged inside the experience of workers. So I will present a little bit more the concept of living labor, which comes from Marx, but to have an intuitive first idea of it, living labor and its ecological meaning, it's, for example, Patrick, a forest worker of the National Office of the Forest in France, who says, my job is not to be a woodcutter, as the state imposed me to do. So it's a struggle I will present you against productivism and extractivism imposed by the state. But the meaning of my work is to be a nature greener, a greener of nature. And this kind of statements of the workers, it's forged inside the class experience of workers, which is opposed to the standpoint on work and ecology of the owners or of the state. So the idea is that to oppose green capitalism, I will tell more about what I call green capitalism and also catastrophe capitalism in the third part. But in general, against the ecology of the top-down ecology, or the ecology of the states, or the ecology of the capitalist companies, there is a class-based standpoint, a class-based ecology of workers. So the idea of the book is to show on this basement that there is a central function of workers in the ecological bifurcation of revolution that is necessary to activate what Walter Benjamin, maybe you know, this Marxist scholar, and Michael Lewy, which is an eco-Marxist philosopher, has called ecological revolution as an emergency brake. The idea is that we have to stop catastrophe, rush towards disaster, and ecological revolution should be thought as a brake. So the book, I won't tell a lot of things about the general project, and I really want to aim for you on some examples, but I will say also that on the basis of some analysis of ecological catastrophes that involves work, for example, one of the chapters will be on the concept of green capitalism and techno-solutionism, and I will take the example of Fukushima catastrophe, for example. And in each chapter, I will take one example of catastrophe and one example of struggle and alternative, which involves workers and alliances between workers, inhabitants, and ecological activists or environmentalists. So on the basis of that, I discuss eco-Marxist theory, eco-feminist theory also. So I will try to show a little bit in this conference on the basis of some examples how I aim to intervene into the discussions in political ecology today on the basis of these examples. Okay, so this is there are some references of books I have already written, or this one is a more activist book of attack on the rights of workers in an ecological perspective. Okay, so I will do three things today. Primarily, and before all, I will talk about struggles. So four socio-ecological struggles. Maybe I will talk more about the struggles in France, but I will also talk about others. And the question is, how do workers encounter ecological preoccupation? How do workers, which are not ecological activists, on the basis of their experience of work, how do they encounter ecology? They don't read books about ecology, they don't take courses about political ecology, they don't speak the language of scientific ecology, but inside their struggles, inside their experience, there is some path towards ecology. Then I will talk a little bit about the theoretical implications of this for eco-Marxism, and I will emphasize more on the political consequences of this political ecology of workers. So the first part is about the path towards the ecological meaning of work. So in the literature, and in general, even in ecological discussions with academic or activist discussions, we talk a lot about how workers encounter ecology on the basis of the four first elements: disasters, when you have a catastrophe, industrial or climate disasters, when you have deterioration of health at work or of environmental health, health for the inhabitants around the territory of the plant or the company. There is also some discussions about how workers discover their affective attachment to living beings, to nature, to ecosystems, and also about the new environmental constraints, requirements, normativity, laws. But when one do inquiry on the socio-ecological struggles of workers, we can find other paths, less obvious and very interesting, which are what I will talk about. One, we can encounter as workers ecology by a reflection on the quality of labor, by the reflection on the technical mastery of workers, on the basis of the territorial embeddedness or the pursuit of material autonomy. So it's linked also to a chapter I have wrote in this book, which is forthcoming, Do Work Still Make Sense? Okay, so let's shift to a first example. So this is an ongoing struggle in France of forest workers, of the public National Forestry Office. And for the last decade, let's say, they are mobilizing against the imposition of an extractivist logic by the state in forest management. So they oppose a lot of things, the unions, SNUPFEN Solidaire and CGT Forêt, main unions of the sector. They oppose first job cuts, the use of contract workers, the consequences of mechanization and individualization of labor on their health, but also on the basis of this union reflection and criticism of these changes and deterioration of the quality of labor, they have done a work, a reflection on the ecological implication of their work and have began to oppose very explicitly now the doctrine of the state, which is that the forest is a space to be exploited and make profitable. Also, they have encountered with searchers, academic researchers, and with other unionists, the idea that their own job is weakened or have a deterioration because the forest is deteriorated both by the state and by climate change and pollution. So it's an example also. I will talk about co-research in Italy. You have the tradition here of co-ricerca from operaism. They do really a co-research with some colleagues. I will tell you more about it in a minute. What have they done? On the basis of quite classical reflection on the quality of labor, they have done alliances, built alliances with environmental associations, Réseau d'Action Forestière, SOS Forêt, Canopée, NGOs or ecological associations that have accepted to come into the woods with them, to investigate together and pay attention to their working conditions, notably concerning accident risks due to the mechanization of work. Forest work today in France is one of the most risky jobs in France. There are a lot of accidents and a lot of suicides. I will come to that afterwards, because each forest worker is inside a machine on his own with a big space of the forest to be responsible for, and they see the deterioration of the forest individually and very rapidly. So the whole discussion in the unions is also because of the health and mental health issues and suicides also at the beginning. I will come again to it. So they have understood that if they want to do alliances with ecologists, they have to tell them to come into the woods with them and to show them the meaning and the gestures and skills of their jobs. But because it is difficult to think, to conceive, to put words on the ecological meaning of one's work, they have felt the importance to work with researchers. So they did a co-research with psychologists of works in psychodynamics of works, colleagues with whom I'm also in dialogue and in discussion, which has allowed them to write and to analyze their own living labor as they themselves write and tell. So I will quote a little bit. So my method is also about basing on writings of workers. So I will quote one of the three of them. Union hypotheses have been confirmed and made explicit through psychodynamics of work, which is the academic discipline of the colleagues. One such example is the importance of the collective redefinition of the doctrine. In the case of public foresters, us, this means how the missions assigned to the ONF by the state are articulated. The protection of forests and biodiversity, wood production, and the forest's social function. In other words, this concerns the future of public forests and the quality of labor, yet this fundamental debate is no longer really being held among forestry workers, which leads to difficulties around the meaning of work within collectives. Okay, so to sum it up, through their alliances and with ecologists, through their co-research with academics, workers has become to begin to defend as inseparable both their working condition and the ecological meaning of their work. And one motto is, we are not woodcutters, we are nature greeners. In the terms of Karl Marx, so to whom I borrow the term of living labor, these workers, they defend the perspective of living labor against the perspective of dead labor. It's the concept of Marx. Dead labor of capitalist money and of the machines, which their public employers under the new public management seek to impose. Okay, so this is a first example. I would have a lot more to tell, but I want to tell about at least 2 or 3 other struggles. To sum it up, living labor here, it refers to workers' attachment to their professional practices and gestures, and the ecological meaning of work emerges from this attachment to the quality of labor, understood as inseparable from a specific kind of social relation with nature and ecosystems and living beings. Okay, a lot of times when I talk about examples of socio-ecological struggles, then students or unionists or others say, okay, but forest workers, they are working in ecology, they are inside the nature. So let's keep to another example, less obvious, oil refinery workers at Total Grand Puy in France, who has also done an alliance against Total's project and tried to reflect on the ecological consequence of their own work. So, second example, also in France in the last 5 years. So it's the second path towards the ecological meaning of work, technical mastery of work. So in early 2021, workers at Total, so you see Total Energy, it's the big oil company in France and in the world. Total's Grand Puy oil refinery workers went in strike to oppose a plan of Total to convert the site into a so-called zero oil platform. So Total was defending that their project was ecological, and they contested, they challenged the idea that it was ecological by doing an alliance with Greenpeace, Les Amis de la Terre, and other ecological NGOs to contest, to challenge this project. So what was the project? The project was to shift the oil platform to a biomass energy platform, and it involved 700 job cuts. So the idea at the beginning of the CGT unionists was, okay, they are doing a greenwashing of job cuts, but is it really green? We don't know. So they went to an alliance which was already there, which was called Plus Jamais Ça after the pandemics, and now it's called the Ecological and Social Alliance, with CGT, Solidaire, which are unions, Greenpeace, Les Amis de la Terre, which are NGOs, and also ATTAC, that maybe you know as an association. It exists also in Italy and elsewhere. And they say, okay, is it really ecological? The project was to do a multi-purpose site combining biofuel production, plastic manufacturing from plant-based materials, recycling, and solar energy generation. It's really the green capitalist, it's paradigmatic of the green capitalist project. And so they want to see scientists of working with Greenpeace most of all, and they questioned the true ecological value of the plan and began to develop an alternative vision, saying biomass energy is more polluting and more nocive in terms of global warming. And we want to have another counter-project, a counter-project that would really be ecological. So they managed to write a common plan to this counter-project, and then, of course, against Total, if you're only a union and an NGO, you can't win, so it has only been a counter-project written, and the struggle is over now, even if there was also a strike this year against new cuts. Okay, how can this alliance be understood? How can all refinery workers can have the idea that they should do and lead from their own a counter-ecological project? So I again quote one of the workers. Valentin and I said, we need to go after Total on ecological grounds, and the best way to dismantle ecological arguments is when it's ecologists themselves doing it. The CGT site delegates say something more. That's what we tried to do at Grand Puy, convince both the workers and more broadly the environmentalists that the working class is the solution to driving ecological struggles. It is in any case the only class that possesses both the balance of power and the knowledge of the tools of production necessary to shift them toward real ecological goals. So as you see, he's really very politicized. Worker control over the means of production is fundamental. So here the language is very politicized, but the idea is shared by the other colleagues. And what is this idea? This idea is that they know, I quote again, we know very well what we are discharging in the river, what kind of polluting and toxic material we are discharging, because the problem of oil refinery, it's not only global warming, it's also all the toxic and polluting materials that are discharged in the water. And they say, but we also know how not to do it, provided our work is in the right framework. Okay, so here, living labor, I speed up a little bit, refers to the experience and knowledge of tools, of work processes, and of their consequences. This is really a very interesting, simple idea, but that is not very central in mainstream bourgeois ecology. Workers, they know the consequences of what they do, even when it's very eco-destructive. The ecological meaning of work is constructed through the mediation of a sense of responsibility, of agency, rooted in this technical mastery of the means of production. So this was the two main examples I wanted in this first part to tell. But I will tell just a little bit about GKN Collective, which maybe some of you know it's in Italy now these days, but I will take 2 or 3 minutes. And also maybe another example just to tell you it existed. And it's interesting about the Zone à défendre of Notre-Dame-des-Landes that in France has been, and maybe in Europe, has been one of the main ecological struggle, more on the autonomous parts in France against project of airports. Okay, ex-GKN, very in a nutshell. So in 2021, workers at the GKN driveline automotive transmission systems in Campi Bisenzio near Florence in Italy are fired. 500 people, workers fired by email by their owners, and they began to occupy their factory and to find some allies in the social movement. And the first allies they find after unions are Youth for Climate Florence. It's really very striking. I've been there sometimes. It's a very working class 50 years old men for the most of them, doing an alliance with people of your age in Youth for Climate Florence that are not at all from the working class, more from the middle class, very educated, and they did a very interesting alliance together. And with them, and with also a co-research with colleagues in peace, sociologists and historians for most of them, they wrote an alternative plan to do an ecological conversion of the plant, not to do any more elements for the automotive industry, but to produce solar panels and now more cargo bikes. So this is an example very interesting of ecological reconversion by workers from the bottom up. And what is very striking and interesting, and I will only say that, is that in their diary, so they wrote a journal, a book about their struggle. There is also cultural convergence politics, very interesting. They did a film, they did a theater, piece, they wrote a journal, they do a festival of literature in the plants. It's really very interesting. And inside you find a lot the ideas that our plant, our workplace belongs to the territory. This is what I call territorial embeddedness. It belongs to the territory, and belonging to the territory is also being linked to a natural and social and historical ecosystem. So I quote again a little bit, and then I will shift to other examples and arguments. For example, it's Dario Salvetti who writes, no, it's in the collective struggle, the factory belongs to the territory that defends it. Or, above all, our movement is to prevent the Campi Bisenzio plant from becoming yet another environmental monster on our land. And their ecological project is linked to what they call an integrated factory, a cooperative, and they have this concept of integrated factory. And this is, I quote Dario Salvetti, he says, the integrated factory is the idea, socially integrated factory, meaning a factory that lives in close collaboration with the surrounding territory. So there is also this idea that a working place has a history, a working collective has a history, and this history is also being embedded, being inscribed inside a territory, which makes you responsible and which makes also the territory and the inhabitants responsible to what it will become. I think that if I want to tell more about eco-Marxism and political consequences and also about the mega-bassins in France, I will skip the fourth example, just to say that there was a huge, for 10 years, occupation of a small part of land in France, the ZAD de Notre-Dame-des-Landes, which was a very important ecological struggle, which was very formative for my generation, for example. And in Notre-Dame-des-Landes, a lot of people came to inhabit the land, but also to work. And so there was a really very interesting reflection on productive and reproductive work. So I don't have the time, but it's very important, of course. There is also living labor in reproductive work, which is reproducing the means of production and the subsistence that is necessary to live, to produce. And there was a very interesting movement of these autonomous activists, which were not ecologists at the beginning, that discovered a territory, a wet territory, very specific, where you cannot produce whatever, where that you have to do inquiry into the possibilities of nature and ecosystems, and also a lot of reflections on transmission of reproductive ecological skills. How you can, for example, wash dishes without polluting your territory. Okay. This I will skip. And go to the second part. So to sum up the first part, these examples show for me, in the book I'm writing, that living labor constitutes a fundamental lever for the formation of an ecological meaning of work. And it's also inside the struggles that workers can become more ecologists than they were at the beginning, if I sum it up. Okay, and this is very important, of course, for ecological bifurcation and transition from below. So some thoughts about eco-Marxism and more theoretical part of my work, because before I develop more on political consequences. So in ecological Marxism, which is a current in contemporary Marxism that criticizes productivism inside Marxism and that tries to recast and reconstruct Marxism on the basis of ecological and social struggles, which is also the little book that Pietro mentioned as an introduction. The main, and normally you know a little bit about it, the main paradigm is metabolical rifts. It's John Bellamy Foster, the first book of Kohei Saito. So I will a little bit present this paradigm and then show what I try to do, which is a little bit or very different, and to try to challenge also what I see as scientism and techno-solutionism inside the metabolical rift paradigm. Okay? So I will first present what it is, and then I will try to show what kind of other kinds of eco-Marxism I think we should defend, reconstruct. So what is Metabolic Rift School or Oregon School? So it's, for example, John Bellamy Foster in Marx's Ecology, and then Paul Burkett and Kohei Saito and others. They have found in Marx the transversal theme of the metabolism between man and nature. So a little bit of Marxology, but maybe 1 minute, not too much. Labor is defined in the Capital, chapter 5, as, I quote, a process between man and nature, it is very, very well known, a process by which man, through his own action, mediates, regulates, and controls the metabolism between himself and nature. So what you can grasp easily is the idea that labor regulates the metabolism between man and nature. Foster and others, they say, okay, Marx, in the all of these books, have defended that capitalism is a rift or a breakdown, a disruption. It destroys this regulation. For example, it's the quotation here from the Capital. In the Capital volume 1, he finds that capitalist agriculture, because of the increase in intensity and the use of chemical fertilizers, which was being developed in the 19th century, and it's also linked to someone, Justus von Liebig, that he's writing, that he's reading, I won't do now, Marxology. And he found that it disturbs the metabolic interaction between man and the earth. Why? Because the fertility of the soil is deteriorated by the fertilizers, okay? They discover, Marx and others, that if you increase the intensity of the culture and if you use chemical fertilizers, after 2, 3, or 10 years, the soil will be unfertile. You will have destroyed the soil for culture. It's very contemporary, but it was the very, very beginning of the scientific observation of this, and Marx was very strict at the beginning. He was very interested by chemical fertilizers, by the increase in intensity, and then he read Justus von Liebig that in the 7th introduction of his work said, in fact, all of what I've done and I've written is false because it destroys the fertility of the soil. And so Foster and others, they say there is in Marx the idea that this metabolism, this exchange of materials between man and nature can be deregulated, disrupted, broken by capitalism. For him, this metabolic rift paradigm and criticism can also allow to criticize other kinds of phenomena. The separation between town and the countryside, the pollution of water, deforestation, the degradation of workers' health, and degradation of soil's fertility, all this, for John Bellamy Foster, and he pretends that there is this idea transversal in Marx, it is a rift in the metabolism between man and nature. What is the consequence? The consequence for them is that we should develop a higher level science. So this is the other a bit long quotation from John Bellamy Foster and Brett Clark in The Robbery of Nature. We should develop a higher level science under state control that could restore this metabolism and subordinate work to what I call a new scientific socialism, science under the control of a democratic state. Okay, so at the end of the quotation, you can see we need ecological planning. The idea of the state is a bit implicit here, but the whole idea is this, and for those who know a bit of Engels and Marx, it is a scientific socialism from the 21st century. So there are some problems with that. There is a problem because of reading of Marx. It's not very important for you, I think, but it's the idea that there is an absolute internal coherence in Marx from the beginning to the end with one paradigm. It's not Marx. Marx is not a systematic philosopher. He's not someone who make dogmas. This Marx doesn't exist. And also, I claim that saying that Marx or whoever in the 19th century was ecologist is anachronistic. It's not a good idea. We can discuss about it now or afterwards. He had concerns for nature, but he was not an ecologist. But the problem is for contemporary struggles and thoughts. There is also a critical problem. I claim that we can't criticize every ecological catastrophe with this idea of metabolic rift. For example, it downplays, it has a blind spot, all of the destruction of biodiversity, of living beings, of living humans and non-humans, of plant, animal species and ecosystem, the idea of destruction of nature, it can't be catched by the idea of metabolic rift. It's the concept of alienation, and he can't catch the idea of destruction. And this is why I claim we should begin with the idea of ecological catastrophes. It's because catastrophes are ongoing for at least 200 years, and it's about destruction. Destruction of cultures, of towns, of communities, of species, of individuals. It's not only a question of deregulation of the metabolism between nature and the human beings. And there is also a political problem, which is what is most important for me. The idea of development of science under political control, rather than what I claim is more Marxist and eco-Marxist, a democratic revolution of labor and social relations. It's not really compatible with Marx, okay? But it does not allow us, from my point of view, to criticize the problems in green capitalism and in Green New Deals today, the problems with the very bureaucratic conception of Green New Deals that I think that workers in ecology can help us criticize. So there is a critical and political problem that it is compatible with the techno-solutionism of green capitalism. And also, for example, Foster, in his recent papers, he says, okay, China is not really ecological, but it's in the good direction. So you can see that maybe there is a problem if China is really ecological, maybe there is a theoretical and political problem in his argumentation. Okay, and so the idea is that they all focus on the objective necessity of an ecological revolution. This is what they try to find in Marx, and I try to find the subjective forces, the subjective motivations, the strategy, maybe also, that we can find to do the necessary ecological revolution. So I propose also to shift a little bit eco-Marxism and say, maybe now we could go to a third generation that will focus on, okay, on the basis of which struggle, of which experience, which social forces. Okay, in maybe 10 minutes, we will have the time for the ecological revolution, which is urgent, so it's in 10 minutes, it's perfect. Up. Okay, so some inputs which will be the more concrete about the political consequences of workers or living labor ecology, and I will take a new example about the water war in France, the mega basins conflicts, and reflect a little bit about what could be a transition to agroecology in France on this basis. Okay. So I don't have a lot of time to talk about what I call catastrophe capitalism, but it's an important idea. I claim that we are entering into a new period of capitalism, which we can describe as making links between apparently very different things. There is green capitalism, maybe this you know, carbon markets, green finance. We call it, for example, for the neo-extractivism for the energy transition, green neo-industrialism, big tech ecology. this is the mainstream ecology today. It's carbon markets, green finance, and green neo-industrialism. It's techno-solutionist ecology. The idea that there will be technical responses and answers to the ecological catastrophes. But there are also other kinds of current phenomena that are linked to this and very important. The second phenomena, which is very recent, is what Andreas Malm and others has called fossil fascism, the ecological discourse of the right wing. There is, some scholars call it carbo-fascism, the idea that there is no, the discourse of the far right, saying there is no global warming at all, we can drill, we can extract, there is no problem at all, and if there is a problem, it is linked, in fact, to the migrants, or to in other kinds of racist ideology. It's linked also to what is called in the scholar discussion green nationalism. And there is also another phenomena, which is that new wars. So it's linked to a paper in French, which I wrote for Contretemps recently. We can also have a political ecology lecture of the wars in Ukraine and in Palestine, saying that it is also linked to the reconfiguration of the global energy market, of technological hegemony, and of environmental militarism. The idea is that there will be, in the mainstream scenario for the future of green capitalism and oil extractivism, and also environmental militarism. That means that the answers to ecological problems will also be militarized. It's also what imperialist states are anticipating. Okay, ecological catastrophe capitalism is about adapting capitalism to the ecological catastrophes. It's also what is doing the French state with regards to agriculture. So, in 5 minutes, so we have 20 minutes for discussion. Climate warming projections for 2050 in France, they imply, and for Italy it's the same, but for France, it implies huge losses for agricultural production in whole Europe, but also in France. It implies most centrally increasing severe and widespread droughts, as we had with the heat waves on 2022 and 23 in France. So whatever the trajectory, there is an absolute necessity, and everyone knows this, for farmers and peasants to adapt. The question is how they will adapt. Will they adapt by shifting to agroecology, or will they adapt by shifting to a more productivist and techno-solutionist agriculture? Inside this whole picture, there is the question of water. So the drought of 2022 and 23 mediatized and publicized the idea that there is a big water scarcity, but we know it for 20 or 30 years in France. The scientists know this. But it's not something that is hugely and widely discussed. Now it is discussed now for 2 or 3 years because there were these heat waves, but also because there was a huge controversy and conflict about the megabassins. Megabassins, it's big-scale reservoirs of water in order to irrigate big companies of farming and agriculture. It's not for the small peasants, it's for the huge companies of farming, and because they lack of water. So the idea is to have big reservoirs that allow to take a lot of water from the earth and redirect it towards some of the peasants. Yes. So this is a quotation of an international text in support of the movement against the mega basin. So there is a project in Poitou, and it's near my university in Poitiers, a project of the biggest mega basins of mega reservoir in Europe. We've just won this battle by a legal interdiction of it 5 years after the beginning of the struggle. And in 2023, there was a big demonstration, 10,000 people. We came to the place where the mega basin was being constructed to say we should not allow it to be constructed. We should dismantle what is already done. And there was a lot of police repression and violence. Well, for those who knows, it was very striking and very formative for the ecological movement in France. What is interesting for me is that it's a labor issue. It's a conflict not between the countryside and the towns. It's a conflict between big and small peasants in the region. It's a class conflict about who will have the water resources that are available at the moment or that will be available. I quote again a spokesperson of the union, of the peasant union in the region, of the Confédération Paysanne. The subject of the basin is not a fight between urban environmentalists and farmers, but a question of access to and sharing of water among peasants. The question is about how will farmers in the region work in 30 years? And it's also a union conflict, which is not very discussed and mediatized, because there is the union of the owners, the FNSEA, which are supporting the mega basins, and the owners of the small peasants, the comrades of the Confédération Paysanne, which are leading the contestation. Which is, okay. To conclude and have the time to discuss. Okay. I claim in some of my recent papers, for example, Démocratiser le travail, democratizing work in the process of ecological and social revolution, that there is a problem of lack of interest to labor and work in most of the left-wing ecological planning proposals. Most of them, they say, for example, for agriculture, in France, even the radical left, we should hire 1 million peasants. This is we should have 1 million peasants that do agroecology, and then we will have the material forces and the possibility to do this ecological bifurcation. But if we come from the ground, what do we see? We see that most of the peasants who do agroecology, they stop after 2 or 3 years because of the climate problems, drought or heat waves, because there are not any economic or political solidarity when they have problems of incomes. There are also problems of mental health issues, deteriorating conditions of work, and even suicide in agroecology. Most of them, when they begin, even with the help, with economic help, they stop after 2 or 3 years. So there is the necessity to, and this is the kind of proposals we make with Attack and others, and me also, to do 2 things. First of all, we need training, a lot of training, and a lot of new economic and political solidarity, because you can't just be alone as a worker in agroecology. You have to be surrounded by a whole territory that will have economic solidarity if You have crops, for example, etc. It's also linked to some proposals and alternatives that are being tested in the south of France. Maybe I can talk about it at the end. But we need also, which is the big picture, we need to redirect this work towards needs. And so we need institutions. That's really my point. We need new institutions for inhabitants to democratically plan about the needs, about the social needs, and for workers to democratically decide how they will respond to their needs. And so this is what I call eco-councilism, with three new institutions that would allow social councils to deliberate and decide about the needs, economic councils at the level of the branch to discuss between workers, to do some planning between workers in the various moments and companies and professions, and company councils of the workers at the level of each economic service sector. Maybe to conclude, I could say it's the same for university. I will take a last example. We have a lot of energy savings plans, which are really very bureaucratic and ineffective. It was the same during the pandemics. No, we have some people saying you can walk about there, but not walk there. It's the same for energy plans. This kind of proposals and of examples, because it's also struggles and alternatives that are trying to be developed. It's about discussing between teachers, staff, and students on the real needs and on the real work in order to decarbonate, depollute, and green the sector of research and university, as well as the other sectors. This is what I call eco-unionism as a part of the strategy for eco-socialism, but maybe we can talk about it in the discussion more in details. Thank you very much for your attention. We have only 15.
Yeah, so we have some time for questions. Thank you so much. We have time for questions. I think there are concepts. Or any questions? I always have questions, but I can have long conversations with him afterwards. You too. So go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank you for your amazing presentation. The question I have is about, actually, I kind of have two questions, but the first one is to address the current situation with politics in France, for example. How do you think this will affect the whole situation? That's the first thing what we're trying to get here. The second thing I wanted to ask is regarding, at the end of the last slide, it was talking about decarbonization, right? And that led me to the question regarding nuclear energy, since it's one of the least polluting, let's put it simply like that, if done correctly, and given that the technology has gone such a long way ahead in the last 50 years, why don't we use it as often, and why Europe is terrified of it to use it in its effort to decarbonize it? Thank you.
Do we take, if there are other questions, and maybe I will try to sum up my answers, if there are others.
Anybody online?
Or I can begin.
You begin.
Okay, thanks for the questions. So it's huge questions and short answers. but we can talk about it later, so it's possible for you. So in France, there is these last years discussion about ecology. It began with the pandemics. It was followed also by the controversy on megabassins. Of course, the mainstream discussion is really very reactionary because the kind of struggles, all the kind of struggles that I have presented are termed and criticized in the media as eco-terrorism. No? So it's important to know that there is also this ideological and hegemonic question about how we talk about the struggles and the workers and all that. And there is also the rise of, I would term it green nationalism, the far right, which is very, very high in France and which is maybe about to take the power at the next elections. They say we have two big problems, migrations and the false ecology of, the false problems of the ecology that international institutions try to convince us to put constraints on us. It has led to a discussion about how the agricultural, because there was also a peasant movement which was called the Bonnet Rouge, Red Hats last years, and it has become a huge argument for the far right. So to sum it up, there is a kind of trial to instrumentalize ecological problem for the far right, and from my point of view, there is a very bureaucratic approach of ecological planning and ecological solutions from the left. So it is a very urban and upper middle class thing, that there is really a class problem, and it is also what I try to show. If ecology remains bourgeois proposal and also upper middle class discussion without an attention to the workers, peasants, and plant workers, it will be the radical, the far right who will take advantage of it. And now concerning nuclear energy, bon, I'm very opposed, as most of the tradition of political ecology to nuclear energy, because it's very polluting. It's very deteriorating for the health of workers. And also, it's a big problem of industrial risks. But not only. The question is also, do we think that technical solutions, it's techno-solutionism. So, of course, at one moment, to avoid that catastrophes become cataclysm, maybe we can, even as a progressive ecology, say that some nuclear energy for some times is acceptable. But it's not the solution. The only solution is about degrowth. I didn't talk about degrowth communism of Saito, but it's also interesting that, for example, the peasant movement at Soulèvement de la Terre, they are also linking with question of degrowth, of changing social relations, etc. So, again, who is promoting nuclear energy plus solar panels? It's China. It's not really an ecological achievement. But of course, I can understand that we need a transition. For a time of transition, we can't shift absolutely technically, and there is some technical questions about how we can decelerate. So, in general, it's not a solution. We should avoid the development of nuclear energy, but we should be open to discussion with nuclear energy workers also, who have interesting things to say.
Some more questions? Okay. 2 questions.
I'm sorry. So I was really interested in the examples that you showed us, especially with forestry, which is prevalent where I grew up. But I feel like they're all indicative of this trap of capitalism that we scholars in all fields have been kind of discussing and criticizing for decades, especially since, for example, Rachel Carson back in the 60s. And so we are occasionally asked to how we feel about the future, if we're either optimistic or pessimistic. And I'm curious about how you feel personally about the future of, or even the likelihood of a positive outcome.
So Alexis, before you answer, I'll ask a question from those online. So Charles Wolf asking about the problem of technosolutionism in relation to Foster's metabolic rift idea. So if you can say something more about that. We have more questions online, but we won't be able to answer all of them. So we'll be in contact later with our further public.
So thanks for the questions. So first of all, you mentioned your interest in the forestry struggle, which is interesting. It's that it's against the state, and there is also, it's very revealing of what is green capitalism today. So this is the public sector, but there is also a huge private sector of forest workers in France, and it's quite interesting for me that the struggle really began in the public sector against the state, that because until the 20 years ago, there was a shift after the catastrophe of 1999 in France. They had the impression that the state were giving them functions, biodiversity, the social uses of forest and cutting woods, and that they were betraying them because they were saying to them that they have 3 functions, but they were imposing them to only cut woods. Yes, cut woods. So it's interesting also because it's not only a problem about capitalist companies. It's a more broad problem about how the states enters in and what is green capitalism. So how do I feel personally? Working on these struggles, it's really something that gives optimism, I think. And I have also a child which is 4 years old, so I'm obliged to be optimistic. On the first page of the book, we quote an author I really like, which is Daniel Tanuro, and he says, I put it at the end, it is too late to be pessimistic. It's also a question very political about the sense of the emergency. If you say, and if you understand that catastrophes are already ongoing for 200 years, there is no emergency in 2 years. The political ecology who says us we have to find the solutions in 2 or 3 years, it's very often to tell us to do whatever. What you do in the emergency, you do from the, you can't do it bottom up, you can't do it properly, you can't change really social relations. So the whole part of my inquiry about workers' ecology, it's really also a way for me to remain optimistic and to have the idea that there is the temporality of capital, very quick, there is the temporality of nature, very long, and there is the temporality of work that can really change things. And it's not in 2 years, but it's not in 200 years, it's in 10, 20, 30 years. So I have this idea that we have 20, 30, 50 years, the moment of my life, where we really can amorce something like an ecological revolution, even if it will be very long to shift out of the Anthropocene afterwards. And then on technosolutionism and Foster, maybe I was a bit too quick and implicit. The problem with Foster is not technosolutionism, is scientism and state-centered conception of ecological planning. So the consequence is that he is very weak to criticize technosolutionism. It's not that he promotes technosolutionism, it's that he doesn't have the tools to criticize it. And this is why also, it's for 100 other reasons also, but this is also why he has this interest for the ecological civilization paradigm of China, which is very technosolutionist, and he is not able to criticize it because it's really state-centered and science-centered way of approaching things. My take on science and on the state is that it's work. So scientists are workers, and state bureaucrats are workers also, and we need, just as the ONF struggles inside science and inside state, inside the public sector. So this idea that there's something exceptional with the science and the state from the perspective of the centrality of work is not very plausible. And he has really not a lot of things to say about workers, work and labor.
Okay. So I think we need to wrap up. Thank you so much. Join me to thank our guests today. So for those who have to run, please do. So I know there is a ferry very soon, but if you want to spend some more time with our guest, you also have the chance to exchange some words with him in person. And for those who are online, thank you for joining. I'm sorry I couldn't collect all questions, but we'll be in touch. You have the email of our speaker, so feel free also to contact him in that way. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you again.